kind of crazy, isn't it? Like, how much of our lives are online now?
It really is.
And it feels like every time you turn around, there's another scam, another email, another text message. It's like, wait a minute, is this legit?
Yeah.
And the scary thing is, these cyber scams, they're not just small potatoes. We're talking billions with a B, dollars lost every single year.
Billions.
I mean, get this. In 2022 alone, people lost a staggering, are you ready for this?
Yeah.
$3.3 billion just to investment scams.
Wow.
So clearly these criminals are doing something right, and today we're going to figure out what that is.
Yes, we are.
We're diving deep into the world of cyber scams.
Yeah.
But we've got a fantastic resource to guide us. An essay by, let me make sure I pronounce this right, Jörg-Owe.
Jörg-Owe, that's right.
So Schneepat, he really breaks down why these scams work. And think of this deep dive as like your cheat sheet.
Okay.
We're going to unpack the emotional tricks, those psychological blind spots that we all have, and, of course, the tech weaknesses that cyber criminals exploit.
Schneepat really lays it all out there.
He does. So by the end of this, you'll know exactly what to look for.
Absolutely. And more importantly, what you can actually do about it. Because the goal here is to empower you, not just to scare you.
Exactly. So we'll look at the different types of scams, who's most at risk, like, are you particularly vulnerable? And, of course, how to protect yourself, which is really the most important part.
Can't forget that.
So I guess the first question is, with so many different scams out there, where do we even start? It's like a buffet of bad choices.
Well, maybe the best place to start is with the ones that are costing people the most money. Schneepat, in his essay, spends a lot of time on investment scams.
Oh, yeah, investment scams.
Yeah.
Like, is this thing promising the moon? Too good to be true? Probably a scam, right?
Right, exactly. Remember that $3.3 billion lost in 2022 we talked about?
Yeah.
A lot of that was investment scams.
Yeah. Okay, so walk me through this. How do these scams actually work? What are those psychological tactics that they use to reel people in?
Well, I think a big part of it is it preys on that very human desire for, easy money, quick riches.
Right, that get-rich-quick scheme.
Exactly. So you might see something that promises incredibly high returns, but with very little risk.
It sounds
too good to pass up, right?
Right. But, like, how do they convince people? Is it just greed, or is there something more going on, like, psychologically?
Oh, it's definitely more than just greed. Schneepat really emphasizes that these scams are incredibly sophisticated in how they manipulate people.
Okay, so how do they do it?
So they might create this sense of exclusivity, like you're part of a special group that's in on this amazing opportunity, and then they add a layer of urgency, like you have to act now or you'll miss out.
Oh, the old FOMO trick.
Exactly. And to make it even more convincing, they might show you some initial returns, which of course are completely fabricated, but it reinforces that belief that this is a legitimate, successful investment.
Ugh, it's so sneaky. It makes you feel like you're actually winning, even though you're about to lose everything.
That's exactly it. And it's not just investment scams. Remember those tech support calls?
Oh, don't even get me started on those. Like, your computer has a virus. We need to access it remotely.
Right.
I mean, it's terrifying.
It's scary. And the thing is, they prey on that fear. They know that most people aren't tech experts, and they exploit that lack of knowledge.
Yeah, and that feeling of like, oh my God, my computer's going to explode if I don't do this right now.
Absolutely. They create this sense of urgency and panic, making you believe that you're in imminent danger and that they're the only ones who can help.
So you're like, okay, fine, take over my computer, just fix it, and then bam, they've got all your data.
Exactly. They can install malware, steal your passwords, your bank details, anything they want, really.
It's so frustrating. And then there's the classic, probably the one we've all heard of, phishing.
Yeah, phishing. Good old phishing.
Schneepat reminds us that this one's all about disguising themselves as a trusted institution to try and get your information.
Yeah. It's like digital trickery, really. They're trying to fool you into thinking they're someone you know and trust.
Okay, but how do they actually make it believable? What are the tactics there?
Well, it starts with the disguise, right? Think about email phishing. They use official-looking logos, the right fonts, even the language sounds legitimate.
Yeah, those emails can be really convincing.
Right. And they often tap into your anxieties, like they might say there's a problem with your bank account or your Amazon order or something like that.
Oh, yeah, anything that's going to make you panic and click without thinking.
Exactly. Because when you're stressed, you're less likely to scrutinize things carefully.
And it's not just emails anymore, is it? It's like they're coming at us from all angles.
Oh, yeah, they've definitely branched out. We've got email phishing, as we talked about, but
Yeah.
then there's SMS phishing or smishing.
Smishing.
Yeah, they're using those text messages now, because it seems more urgent, more personal.
Oh, yeah, like, your bank account has been compromised. Click here to fix it.
Exactly. Or they might say there's a problem with a recent purchase or something like that.
Right. So basically, if you get a text message that seems even a little off, just don't click anything.
Yeah, don't click, don't reply, just delete it. And then we've also got voice phishing, or vishing, which is even more insidious, I think.
Phishing, that's a new one.
Yeah, it's where they actually call you on the phone, often using these automated messages that sound incredibly official.
Like those robocalls?
Kind of, but they can be very sophisticated, and they'll try to get you to give them your information over the phone.
So basically, no matter how they're reaching out, whether it's email, text, or phone call, if it seems fishy, just don't engage.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've talked about investment scams, tech support, phishing. I feel like this is already a lot to keep track of.
It is a lot, but there's more.
Oh, no.
Yeah, we've got to talk about romance scams.
Oh, those are just heartbreaking.
They really are. They prey on people who are looking for love, for connection, and they exploit that in the most cruel way imaginable.
Yeah, what makes these scams so effective, especially on a psychological level?
Schneppet talks about this in his essay, and I think he really hits the nail on the head. These scammers, they don't just pop up and ask for money right away. They take their time.
Okay, so what do?
They build these elaborate online profiles, often using stolen photos, and they spend weeks, sometimes months, cultivating this incredibly intense emotional relationship with their victim.
Wow, it's almost like they're grooming them.
Exactly. And then once they've earned their trust, once they know their victim is emotionally invested, they start asking for money. Usually it's some kind of fabricated emergency, like a medical bill or a family crisis, something that tugs at the heartstrings.
It's so manipulative.
It is. And what makes it even more devastating is that the victim often feels a deep sense of betrayal, like they've been completely fooled by someone they cared about.
Right, the emotional damage can be even worse than the financial damage.
Absolutely. And Schneppet really highlights that these scams often target people who are already feeling lonely or isolated, making them even more vulnerable to these emotional manipulations.
Right, they're preying on those who are most desperate for connection. It's just awful.
It really is. And speaking of awful, let's talk about BEC scams.
BC scams.
Yeah, stands for Business Email Compromise. These are the ones that target companies specifically, and they can be incredibly costly.
So how do these BEC scams work?
Well, as Schneppet explains, it often involves impersonating a high-level executive within a company, like the CEO or the CFO.
Okay, and then what?
And then they'll send emails to employees, usually in the finance department, instructing them to transfer funds to a specific account.
And the employees just fall for it.
Well, the thing is, these emails can be incredibly sophisticated. They'll use the executive's actual name, their email signature. Everything looks completely legitimate.
So how do they get away with that? Don't companies have security measures in place?
They do, but these scammers are always finding new ways to bypass those measures. And they exploit the trust that exists within a company. Employees are used to following instructions from their superiors, so they might not question an email that seems to be coming from the CEO.
Right, it makes sense in a way. You don't want to second-guess your boss all the time.
Exactly. But unfortunately, that can have devastating consequences. Some companies have lost millions of dollars in BEC scams.
Wow, millions. That's insane.
It is. It can cripple a business, especially a smaller one.
So what about those lottery and sweepstakes scams? I still get emails telling me I've won $1 million, which is obviously ridiculous.
Yeah, those are still going strong. They play on that hope of getting something for nothing, winning big without any effort.
Right, everyone dreams of winning the lottery.
Exactly. And these scams, they dangle that dream in front of you, but then they add a catch. They say you need to pay a fee to claim your prize, usually for taxes or processing or something like that.
Oh yeah, I've seen that before. Just send us $500 to release your winnings.
Right. And of course there are no winnings. It's all a lie.
It's just exploiting people's desire for easy money, isn't it?
It is. And often these scams target people who are already struggling financially, who are desperate for a break. It's really predatory.
That's awful. Okay, so we've talked about all these different types of scams, but I'm curious, what are the underlying vulnerabilities that make us all susceptible to these things? What is it about us as humans that they're exploiting?
Well, Schneppet breaks it down into a few key areas. First, there are the psychological vulnerabilities.
Okay, psychological. That makes sense.
Yeah.
Like playing on our emotions.
Exactly. They use things like guilt tripping, fear-mongering, even gaslighting, which is a whole other can of worms, to cloud your judgment and make you act irrationally.
So when you're feeling scared or pressured, you're less likely to think critically.
Exactly. Think about those tech support scams we talked about. They create this sense of panic, like your computer's about to explode, and that makes you more likely to just do whatever they say.
Right. You're not thinking straight. Are there any other psychological vulnerabilities?
Yeah, Schneppe also talks about the role of cognitive impairment and technological literacy. So if you're not familiar with how computers work, how the internet works, you're more likely to fall for these scams.
Right. You might not recognize the red flags.
Exactly. You might not know what a phishing email looks like, or you might accidentally download malware because you don't understand the risks.
And then there's the self-esteem issue, right? Schneppe mentions that too.
Oh, absolutely. People with low self-esteem might be more likely to believe negative feedback from scammers, like in those romance scams.
Oh, right. Like if the scammer says, you're the only one who can help me.
Exactly. They might feel like they need to prove themselves to be the hero, and that makes them more susceptible to manipulation.
That's a really good point. I never thought about it that way before.
Yeah, it's all connected. And then beyond the psychological stuff, there are also those human errors and organizational vulnerabilities.
Okay, so like mistakes that we make or weaknesses in systems.
Exactly. So think about weak passwords. If you're using the same password for everything, or if you have a really easy to guess password, it's like leaving the door wide open for hackers.
Right. It's like using your birthday as your password.
Exactly. Don't do that. And then there's the lack of data encryption. Encryption is like scrambling a message so that only the intended recipient can read it.
Okay, like a secret code.
Exactly. But if your data isn't encrypted and a hacker intercepts it, it's like reading an open book. They can see everything.
So basically, encryption keeps your information safe from prying eyes.
Exactly. And then on a more organizational level, there are things like system misconfigurations.
System what?
Misconfigurations. It's basically when a system, like a computer network, isn't set up properly, and that can create security holes that hackers can exploit.
Okay, so like a flaw in the design.
Kind of, yeah. And then there's the issue of outdated software.
Oh yeah, like when your phone keeps nagging you to update.
Exactly. Those updates often contain security patches that fix known vulnerabilities. But if you don't update, you're leaving yourself open to attack.
So those updates are actually important.
They're super important. And then there's this whole other category of vulnerability that Schneppe talks about called zero-day vulnerabilities.
0 day. That sounds ominous.
It is. Basically, it's a flaw in a piece of software that's unknown, even to the developers.
Oh, wow. So, like, there's no way to protect yourself against it because nobody knows it exists.
Exactly. And hackers can exploit these zero-day vulnerabilities to gain access to systems or steal data before anyone even knows what hit them.
It's kind of scary how many different ways they can get us.
It is. And it's not just about our technical knowledge or the systems we use. Schneppe also talked about how our environment and life experiences can play a role in our vulnerability to scams.
Oh, interesting. So, like, how our past can affect our online behavior.
Exactly. For example, he talks about how people with certain attachment patterns, maybe they had insecure attachments in childhood, might be more susceptible to romance scams. Okay, because they're seeking that connection, that validation.
Exactly. They might be more likely to overlook red flags because they're so eager to believe in the relationship.
It's amazing how interconnected all of this is.
It really is. And it highlights how these scams are exploiting not just our technology, but our humanity, our basic human needs and desires.
Right. So knowing all of this, who's most at risk? Schneppe mentions some specific demographics.
He does. He talks about the elderly being a particularly vulnerable group. And it makes sense, right? They might experience cognitive decline, memory loss, which can make it harder to spot scams.
Yeah, and they also might be more trusting, less familiar with technology.
Exactly. And unfortunately, scammers often prey on their loneliness, their desire for companionship. It's really sad.
It is. But it's not just older people, right? Schneppe also talks about younger people being at risk.
Yeah, teens and young adults are actually surprisingly vulnerable. They might be more impulsive, more likely to take risks online.
Oh, right, because they grew up with the internet. So They might feel more comfortable, less cautious. Exactly. They might not understand the full extent of the risks they're taking.
It's like they have this false sense of security.
Yeah, and scammers know that. They exploit that naivete.
So it's really important for parents and educators to talk to young people about online safety, to make sure they understand the dangers.
Absolutely. And Schneppe also points out that socioeconomic factors can play a role in vulnerability.
So like people who are struggling financially might be more at risk.
Exactly. They might be desperate for a financial break, and scammers will prey on that desperation. They might offer fake loans or investment schemes that promise quick riches.
Right, and people might be so focused on their immediate needs that they don't see the red flags.
Exactly. It's a vicious cycle, unfortunately. And Schnepphat also talks about how certain sectors are more targeted than others.
Okay, like industries that handle a lot of sensitive information.
Exactly. Healthcare, finance, retail, these are prime targets for data breaches and phishing attacks.
Right, because they have access to our personal and financial information.
Exactly. And then there's critical infrastructure like energy grids, water systems, those kinds of things.
Oh yeah, that's scary. Imagine if hackers got into those systems.
It could be catastrophic. And the thing is, a lot of these systems are still using older technology with known security flaws. It makes them very vulnerable.
Okay, so we've talked about who's at risk, but let's talk about the impact of these scams. Obviously, there's the financial cost, but it goes beyond that, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. Schnepphat's essay really emphasizes the emotional and psychological toll that these scams take on victims.
Yeah, because it's not just about losing money. It's about feeling violated, betrayed.
Exactly. People often experience shame, guilt, embarrassment. They might feel like they're stupid for falling for it.
Right, and that can be really hard to overcome.
It can be. And it can lead to depression, anxiety, even PTSD in some cases.
Wow, that's serious stuff.
It is. And for some people, the emotional damage can be far worse than the financial damage, especially in those romance scams where they've poured their heart and soul into a relationship that turns out to be a lie.
Yeah, it's like a double betrayal. You're losing money and your trust in people.
Exactly. And that can make it really hard to move on, to trust again in the future.
So it's not just about recovering financially, it's about recovering emotionally as well.
Absolutely. And Schnepphat also points out that the impact goes beyond individuals. These scams have a wider economic impact.
Right, because it's not just about the money that individuals lose, it's about the damage to businesses, to the economy as a whole.
Exactly. We're talking about job losses, lost productivity, increased costs for security measures. It all adds up.
It's a huge problem, and it's not going away anytime soon.
Unfortunately not. Which is why prevention is so important. Schnepphat spends a good chunk of his essay talking about prevention strategies.
Okay, so what can we actually do about it? How do we protect ourselves from becoming victims?
Well, education is key. Schnepphat emphasizes that we need to educate ourselves and others about how these scams work, what the red flags are, what to look for.
Right, knowledge is power.
Exactly. And these education campaigns need to be targeted towards specific groups like older adults, younger people, people who might be more vulnerable for various reasons.
Okay, so like tailoring the message to the audience.
Exactly. And it can't just be a one-time thing. We need ongoing education, regular training programs, community workshops.
So keeping people informed, reminding them of the risks.
Exactly. And it's not just about teaching people the technical stuff, like how to spot a phishing email. We also need to teach them about the psychological tactics that scammers use, how to recognize emotional manipulation.
Right, because that's often what trips people up.
It is, and there are some simple things that people can do to protect themselves, like using strong, unique passwords for all their accounts.
Oh, yeah, that's a big one. I know I'm guilty of using the same password for multiple things.
We all are, but it's really important to break that habit. And use a password manager if you can. It makes it much easier to keep track of all those different passwords.
Yeah, that's a good tip. What else?
Enable multi-factor authentication wherever possible. That adds an extra layer of security to your accounts.
Okay, two-factor authentication. I've heard of that. Is that the same thing?
Yeah, pretty much. It just means that you need more than just your password to log in. You might need a code sent to your phone, or you might need to use a fingerprint scanner.
Right, so even if someone steals your password, they can't get into your account without that extra step.
Exactly. And it's becoming more and more common, which is great. And then on a more personal level, Schnepphat talks about the importance of building trusted support networks.
Okay, so like having people you can turn to if you're not sure about something.
Exactly. For older adults, that might be a family member or a close friend who can help them identify potential scams.
Right, someone they trust to give them a second opinion.
Exactly. And for younger people, it's important to encourage them to talk to someone if they're ever unsure about something online, whether it's a parent, a teacher, or a trusted friend.
It's like that old saying, if it seems too good to be true, it probably is.
Exactly. If something seems fishy, always err on the side of caution.
And what about reporting scams? I feel like a lot of people might be hesitant to do that, maybe out of embarrassment.
I think that's true. But Schnepphat really stresses the importance of reporting.
Okay, but why is it so important? What difference does it actually make?
Well, for one thing, it helps law enforcement track these scams. identify the perpetrators, and potentially shut them down.
Right, so it could prevent other people from becoming victims.
Exactly. And even if you feel embarrassed or you think your case is too small to matter, reporting it can still help build a bigger picture of what's happening.
So even if you don't think it will help you directly, it could help someone else.
Exactly. It's about taking a collective stand against these criminals.
Right. It's about empowering ourselves and each other.
Exactly. And knowledge is a huge part of that empowerment.
Okay, so to sum it all up, Schneppat's essay has really opened our eyes to the world of cyber scams, and it's not a pretty picture.
It's not. But the good news is that we're not powerless.
Right, we can take steps to protect ourselves.
We absolutely can. And the first step is awareness. Once we understand the risks, the tactics that scammers use, we can start to build those defenses.
And it's not just about being tech savvy, it's about understanding human psychology, our own vulnerabilities.
Exactly. Because these scams are ultimately exploiting our humanity, our desire for connection, our fear of loss, our hope for a better future.
Right. So it's really about being mindful, being cautious, and not being afraid to ask for help when we need it.
Exactly. And that's a message that we all need to hear, no matter how old we are, how tech savvy we are, or what our background is.
Absolutely. So as we wrap up this deep dive, I think the big question for all of us is this. In a world that's increasingly online, how do we find that balance between convenience and security?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
It is.
Yeah.
Because we want to enjoy the benefits of technology, but we also want to protect ourselves from the risks.
Right. And it's not an easy balance to strike.
It's not. But I think the key is to be aware of the risks, to be proactive in our approach to online safety, and to remember that we're all in this together.
I agree. We need to support each other, share information, and work together to create a safer online environment for everyone.
Absolutely. Because at the end of the day, it's not just about protecting ourselves. It's about protecting our communities.
I think that's a great place to leave it.
I do too. So for everyone listening, stay safe out there, and remember, knowledge is your best defense.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. Until next time.